In today's video, I'm covering Ynaros Fallin, a head-to-head combat game that is extremely strategic. Let me explain. This is a 1 to 4 player strategic combat game with different levels of gameplay. Each levels of gameplay directly changes your strategy as you face off against your opponent. The goal of the game is to prove that you are the best shaman, and the way to do this is by getting the most amount of experience. You can gain experience in a bunch of different ways, depending on what level or stage of gameplay you choose. Starting off in level 1, you are racing to get crystals and trying to get as many land tiles as possible to fill up your player board. Each land tile will give you an ability. Some are once per game and some are once per turn. Crystals will also help you gain experience, and they can be used in combat when you enter the same zone as your opponent. You'll be using special dice to hinder your opponent's health to try to win the combat. If you win at combat, then you gain a wild crystal from your opponent. This crystal can be used as any color's crystal, either for future combat, or you can help use them to score experience points on your side of the board. I will cover how combat works and how to conquer lands a little bit later in this video. The game will end once 3 piles of land tiles has run out, or if a player loses all their crystals from combat, and whoever has the most experience points will win the game. So I haven't really covered how movement works yet, so let's talk about that now. The value on your shadow dice represents how much movement you can do on your turn. You can split movement up between different characters on the board. For an example, one character might move 2 spaces, another might use 3 if the value is set at 5. Once your movement is done, then you must decrease your shadow dice by 1. Your shadow dice cannot go lower than 2. You then must spend cards to increase the value of your shadow dice. Now, how do you conquer lands? Well, once lands are discovered by flipping them over face up, you can conquer that land. You must first meet the requirement of that land tile indicated by the circle on that tile. Some have a dice value set, or some might require some extra followers on the board. So just to recap here, level 1 or stage 1 of gameplay is going to teach you all the basics. Combat, how to move, how to win, and all the different subsystems that are going on in the game. And it's probably the least complex version of the game. Going into level 2 and 3, the game gets a little bit more complex, so let me explain how that works. Category 2 introduces new land tiles with new abilities, and instead of crystals, there are face-down tokens with different abilities that you will gain. You can use these tokens to gain new followers, upgrade your followers to be more shamans so you have more shamans on the board, or you can actually use them for their abilities. And there's about 5 different abilities that these tokens have. There will also be new shadow tiles which change the game on how you move on the game board. You'll be playing cards of your color to place down shadow tiles to help slow your opponent down, because if they need to cross your color of shadow tile, it will cost them extra movement points. Shadow tiles will also grant you free movement across the board if you can create a line of your own color of shadow tiles. This will make things a lot harder for you and your opponent to get to those land tiles on the other side of the game board. And you can build stacks of these shadow tiles by spending a lot more cards. Now, those changes might seem small, but they definitely change up the strategy between the 2 different categories, and definitely adding a lot more replayability to the game. And the next level of play is level 3, which gets a little bit more complicated. This introduced even more tokens to gain even more experience points. You're using a new side of the player board. It also introduced temples, which is another way to gain experience points if your character can be on a temple during a certain phase. Category 3 introduces experience fractions, which is another token that will grant you even more abilities. You're also going to be using the other side of the player board, which means you're not going to be able to store as many crystals as before. The combat board also changes to the other side. Now players only have 8 total health instead of 10, making combat a lot more intense. Now, who do I think this game is actually for? Well, if you're somebody that loves strategic combat games, then this is definitely for you. There's a lot of subsystems going on in this game, a lot of things to focus on. It's not a simple move and hit your opponent. There's a bunch of different ways to gain points. And if you just focus on eliminating your opponent, then you're probably not going to win. Because by the time you gain all the crystals, they can gain enough experience points to win the game. Personally, for me, I really enjoy level 1 of the game that teaches you all the basics. Level 2 feels like a completely different game because you're placing down those shadow tiles. It really changes how movement really works in the game and how fast you can move on the board once you get all your colors down. I think a lot of people will really enjoy the replayability that this game has to offer. There's tons of things to focus on and keep track of. Movement, I think, is the biggest thing that links all level of games together, and it's the main key to focus on, because this is how you're gonna divide up your followers to get to one end of the board to the other, how you will enter combat, and how you will conquer lands. Again, super strategic combat game. If it sounds interesting to you, definitely check it out. I have a link for the Kickstarter down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Take care. Bye.